While the world obsessed over Al Capone, John Gotti, and Pablo Escobar, a secretive criminal organization from one of Europe's poorest regions quietly built a global empire worth over $50 billion annually. They control 80% of Europe's cocaine trade. They've infiltrated governments across 3 continents. And unlike every other major mafia in history, they've never had a significant informant break their code of silence. This is the story of the Ndrangheta, the world's richest and most powerful mafia that deliberately stayed invisible. And today, you're going to discover how they did it. Picture the rugged mountains of Calabria, Italy. This is the toe of Italy's boot, isolated, impoverished, and for most of history, completely forgotten by the rest of the world. While tourists flocked to Rome, Venice, and the Italian Riviera, Calabria remained a land of shepherds, subsistence farmers, and desperate poverty. It was here in the mid-1800s that the Ndrangheta was born. The name itself is fascinating. Ndrangheta, pronounced Ndrangheta, roughly translates to heroism or virtue in the old Calabrian dialect. From the very beginning, they saw themselves not as criminals, but as men of honor operating outside a system that had abandoned them. But here, what made them different from every other organized crime group in history? The Ndrangheta wasn't built on business relationships or criminal partnerships. It was built on blood, literal family blood. Unlike the Sicilian Cosa Nostra, which inducted talented outsiders, or the American Mafia, which eventually opened its doors to non-Italians, the Ndrangheta maintained an ironclad rule. You cannot join. You must be born into it. Each clan, called an Ndrina, is based on a single extended family. Fathers, sons, brothers, cousins, uncles. Marriage between clans creates alliances. Blood ties create loyalty that cannot be broken, bought, or threatened. Think about the implications of this structure. When law enforcement tries to flip a member, they're not just asking him to betray his boss or his business partners. They're asking him to destroy his own children, to send his brothers to prison, to condemn his father to death. For over 100 years, this biological bond made the Ndrangheta virtually invisible to authorities. While police focused on the famous Sicilian Mafia, the Calabrian clans operated in complete obscurity, building their empire one quiet deal at a time. In fact, Italian authorities didn't even officially acknowledge the Ndrangheta's existence until 1975. That's right. They had been operating for over a century before anyone in power admitted they were real. But by then, it was already too late. The 1970s and 80s changed everything. While the Sicilian Mafia tore itself apart in bloody internal wars, the famous matanza, or slaughter that killed hundreds of made men, the Ndrangheta watched, learned, and quietly expanded. Calabrians had always been migrants. Poverty drove them to seek opportunities elsewhere. But now, Ndrangheta families began migrating with purpose, not to escape but to conquer. They established cells in Germany, particularly around the industrial cities of the Ruhr Valley. They moved to the Netherlands and Belgium, positioning themselves near major ports. They sent members to Australia, where Italian immigration was booming. They infiltrated Canada, setting up operations in Toronto and Montreal. But they didn't just move people, they moved infrastructure. See, the Ndrangheta had stumbled onto something brilliant. While other mafias fought over territory and control, the Calabrians realized the real money wasn't in controlling the streets. It was in controlling the supply chain. In the 1980s, Colombian cocaine cartels were desperate to break into the European market. The Sicilian Mafia had traditionally handled drug importation, but they were under intense law enforcement pressure. Their leadership was being decimated by arrests and assassinations. The Ndrangheta saw an opportunity. They approached the Colombian cartels with a simple pitch. We're not famous, we don't attract attention, we have family networks across Europe, and we can move your product more efficiently than anyone else." The Colombians agreed, and just like that, the Ndrangheta became the primary importers and distributors of cocaine into Europe. But here's the thing. They did it so quietly that, for nearly 2 decades, European authorities had no idea the Calabrians had taken over the entire supply chain. Then came August 15, 2007, the day the world discovered the truth. It was a warm summer evening in Duisburg, Germany. Outside an Italian restaurant called De Bruno, 6 men sat in 2 cars, waiting. They were young, in their teens and 20s, members of Ndrangheta families from the small Calabrian village of San Luca. What happened next lasted less than 30 seconds. Gunmen emerged from the shadows and opened fire with automatic weapons. All 6 men were killed instantly. Blood pooled on the pavement of a quiet German street as witnesses screamed and scattered. The Duisburg Massacre, as it became known, sent shockwaves across Europe. This wasn't some isolated mob hit in southern Italy. This was a military-style execution in the heart of industrial Germany, carried out with precision and brutality that terrified law enforcement. The investigation revealed something even more disturbing. The massacre wasn't about drugs or territory. It was part of a vendetta between 2 San Luca families that had been going on for nearly 20 years, sparked by a carnival incident in 1991 where eggs were thrown at some women. Eggs, 20 years of bloodshed over eggs. But what truly shocked investigators was what they discovered about the scope of Ndrangheta operations. The murdered men were part of a vast network that stretched across Germany, with deep roots in legitimate businesses, real estate, and the restaurant industry. The Ndrangheta hadn't just visited Germany, they had colonized it. Suddenly, European law enforcement realized they had a massive problem. The quiet Calabrians they'd ignored for decades had built a criminal empire right under their noses. So how did they build an empire worth $50 billion? Let's follow the money. The foundation of Ndrangheta wealth is cocaine. Not selling it on street corners, but controlling the entire European supply chain from source to distribution. The port of Gioia Tauro in Calabria is one of the largest container ports in the Mediterranean. Millions of containers pass through every year. The Ndrangheta controls it completely. Port workers, customs officials, logistics companies, all infiltrated or owned by the clans. Cocaine arrives from South America hidden in legitimate cargo. Bananas from Ecuador, coffee from Colombia, furniture from Brazil. The containers are flagged and rerouted before inspection. The drugs are extracted, repackaged, and distributed across Europe through the family networks established decades earlier. The scale is staggering. European authorities estimate the Ndrangheta moves approximately 80% of all cocaine entering the continent. That's roughly 300 tons of cocaine every single year, with a street value exceeding 40 billion euros. But drugs are just the beginning. The real genius of the Ndrangheta is money laundering. They don't hoard cash like movie gangsters. They invest it, legitimize it, transform it into respectable wealth. In Germany alone, prosecutors estimate the Ndrangheta has invested over 25 billion euros into the legal economy. They own restaurants, construction companies, real estate developments, and manufacturing businesses. They're not just criminals operating in the shadows. They're legitimate businessmen who happen to also run the world's most profitable drug trafficking operation. They've bought hotels in the Swiss Alps, luxury apartments in Berlin and Frankfurt, entire blocks of commercial real estate in Dutch cities, vineyards in France. They've even invested in renewable energy projects, using green technology to launder dirty money. The construction industry is particularly attractive. Large projects involve complex financing, multiple subcontractors, and substantial cash flows that are difficult to trace. The Ndrangheta bids on public infrastructure projects, often undercutting legitimate companies because they're not concerned with profit margins. They're concerned with moving money. And there's another, darker business: toxic waste disposal. Proper disposal of industrial and toxic waste is expensive and heavily regulated. The Ndrangheta offers companies a cheaper alternative. They take the waste, invoice it as legitimate disposal, then illegally dump it in abandoned quarries, farmland, and even the ocean. This practice, known as Ecomafia, has poisoned vast areas of southern Italy and generated billions in profit. Some Ndrangheta bosses have become extraordinarily wealthy. Not Escobar-level flashy, but quietly, invisibly rich. We're talking about men worth hundreds of millions of euros who still live in modest homes in Calabrian villages, driving normal cars, wearing simple clothes. Because that's the key to their success: invisibility. While John Gotti wore expensive suits and courted media attention, while Pablo Escobar built a drug empire that made him a celebrity, the Ndrangheta bosses lived like farmers. They understood something fundamental: the moment you become famous, you become a target. So why has no one stopped them? Why, despite massive police operations and prosecutions, does the Ndrangheta continue to grow stronger? The answer lies in their structure and their strategy. Remember that blood-based organization we discussed? It's proven nearly impossible to penetrate. In the entire history of the Ndrangheta, there has been exactly one significant informant. One. Compare that to the Sicilian Mafia, which has had hundreds of turncoats, including high-ranking bosses who testified against their own organization. The Ndrangheta initiation ritual reinforces this bond. New members undergo a ceremony where their finger is pricked, blood is dripped onto an image of a saint, and the image is burned while they swear an oath. The symbolism is clear. Your blood is mixed with the family. Betrayal means burning in hell. But it's not just fear that prevents betrayal. It's identity. These men don't see themselves as criminals who happen to be related. They see themselves as family members whose shared business happens to be criminal. The distinction matters psychologically. Then there's political infiltration. The Ndrangheta learned from the Sicilian Mafia's mistakes. In Sicily, the Mafia tried to confront the state directly, assassinating judges and prosecutors. This strategy backfired spectacularly, turning public opinion against them and triggering massive crackdowns. The Ndrangheta took a different approach. Instead of fighting the state, they became the state. In Calabria, Ndrangheta members and associates hold positions at every level of government: town mayors, city councilors, regional officials. They don't just bribe politicians. They are the politicians. Elections in some Calabrian towns are essentially contested between different Ndrangheta factions. This infiltration extends to law enforcement and the judiciary, not through dramatic corruption, but through family connections. When your cousin is a police officer, your uncle is a magistrate, and your brother-in-law works in the prosecutor's office, you don't need to bribe anyone. You just need to know what's being investigated and plan accordingly. Operation Crimen Infinito in 2010 revealed the stunning depth of this infiltration. Over 300 people were arrested, including politicians, businessmen, and even a former regional councilor. The investigation showed how Ndrangheta clans had systematically infiltrated the political system, using it to secure government contracts, influence legislation, and protect their criminal operations. But here's what's truly frightening. Despite that massive operation, despite hundreds of arrests, despite international cooperation between law enforcement agencies, the Ndrangheta barely slowed down. Because the system is decentralized, there's no single boss to arrest, no central command to dismantle. Each Ndrangheta operates semi-independently. If one clan gets hit, the others continue operating. It's like fighting a hydra: cut off one head and the body keeps functioning. They also learned from watching American organized crime, get destroyed by RICO statutes. The Ndrangheta maintains separation between their various operations. The people handling drug trafficking don't know the people handling money laundering. The people running legitimate businesses have plausible deniability about criminal activities. This compartmentalization makes it incredibly difficult for prosecutors to build comprehensive cases. Today, in 2025, the Ndrangheta is more powerful than ever. They're present in more than 30 countries across 5 continents. From Australia to Canada, from Germany to South Africa, Ndrangheta cells operate quietly, generating enormous profits and sending them back to Calabria. Recent operations have shown how they've adapted to the modern world. They're investing in cryptocurrency and using it to move money across borders. They're exploiting the COVID-19 pandemic's economic devastation, buying struggling businesses and offering loans to desperate people, creating new networks of dependency and control. The younger generation of Ndrangheta members is different from their fathers. They're educated. They have business degrees. They speak multiple languages. They understand global finance and international law. They're less violent, more sophisticated, and even harder to catch. Climate change is even creating new opportunities. Water scarcity in southern Italy has made water rights valuable. The Ndrangheta controls wells and water distribution networks. Renewable energy subsidies have attracted mafia investment in solar and wind farms. They're literally profiting from going green. Italian authorities estimate the Ndrangheta's annual revenue at €53 billion. To put that in perspective, that's more than the GDP of dozens of countries. It's more than the annual revenue of McDonald's. It's comparable to the GDP of Luxembourg. They are, by any measure, the world's richest criminal organization, and the most successful. The story of the Ndrangheta is ultimately a story about patience, discipline, and the power of staying invisible. While other criminal organizations sought respect, fear, and recognition, the Calabrian clan simply wanted money and power. And by refusing the spotlight, by maintaining their blood-based structure, by thinking in terms of decades rather than years, they achieved both. They proved that in the modern world, the most dangerous criminals aren't the ones making headlines. They're the ones you've never heard of. The ones controlling the ports while you sleep. The ones laundering money through the restaurant where you had dinner last night. The ones sitting in modest homes in forgotten villages, quietly running empires that span the globe. The Ndrangheta succeeded because they understood something fundamental about power. It's most effective when it's invisible. And in a world obsessed with celebrity and attention, invisibility has made them unstoppable. Pause. If you found this story fascinating and want to learn more about the world's most powerful criminal organizations, make sure to subscribe. Next time, we'll explore another mafia that operates in the shadows, building empires while the world looks the other way. Until then, stay curious and remember, the most dangerous threats are often the ones hiding in plain sight.